Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Raging, Explosive, and the Awakened pattern has switched back to the B pattern, so it's different than last week. This week's affixes are going to vary greatly in difficulty depending on A, what your job is, and B, what the rest of your group's composition looks like. So if your group is full of people who can handle explosives, so stuff like, Outlaw Rogues, Havoc Demon Hunters, tanks that are able to kill explosives effectively, then that's going to be very helpful. And if your group contains a druid or a hunter who can soothe the enrage effect off of enemies, that can also be really helpful. That'll be a big difference too. It's also going to be helpful for you if you've got a group that can do tyrannical well. That's easier as the keys are lower, but as you start getting into really high keys, so north of 20, tyrannical starts to be a real problem if you don't have a group with huge amounts of single target damage. But this is a pretty good week if you do have the explosive damage and the enrage spell, and you're only trying to hang out in the 15 to 19 range. All right, so let's get started talking about the dungeons. For the most part, this week's routes don't have to be very different from kind of a standard tyrannical route. You don't really have to, if you have a way that you like to pull dungeons on tyrannical, you don't have to make adjustments like you would on bullstring weeks, for example. So you can kind of do whatever you like here. I recommend starting off with a Lust on Razan. Another option, though, would be to just go straight towards Alunza here in Atal'Dazar. By the way, if you want these routes, they're going to be in the description below, and you can find them on Raider.io every week as well. I would probably avoid fighting a mini-boss with Yasma this week. So it's really annoying to activate all the obelisks in Atal'Dazar. You have to get to both sides and the middle and this awful one. And it's probably gonna involve people pulling stuff to the side and then vanishing or whatever to get to at least one of these two spires. Because you really don't want to fight this double honor guard pack. So that, it's awkward to activate these obelisks, but it can be pretty tough to fight Yasma with, the spider. There's already a kick on Yasma. This is going to be something that stands still and casts under some of the other spiders on Yasma's fight. And that can be like explosive spawning in bad places. Multiple targets, even just a second target on Yasma is going to be a lot more explosives spawning on that fight too. So for that reason, I'd say that this is probably one of the weeks where you should be most interested in not fighting any awakened enemies with end bosses, particularly end bosses with, movement that's going to make it hard to kill explosives. Now, Freehold is a dungeon where I am still willing to fight an awakened enemy with the last boss. I think that this is an easy enough end boss where explosive can be fairly easily managed, and it's so good to not have to go out of your way and activate this spire, by killing all this stuff. So I would still recommend trying to fight the spider with Harlan, especially because his first phase is so easy. Other than that, Freehold, you've got some raging that's going to be potentially worrying, especially Cutwater Harpooners. They are going to be enemies this week, so that can be tough. You've got Tyrannical Eudora and Tyrannical, Skycap and Craig. Those can also be hard fights, so that's going to be the main problem is it's really going to be the bosses. It's going to be the Tyrannical bosses. King's Rest has a few things that can be tough this week. So you've got Raging Shadow of Zul, which is never easy. That's something that you're going to want to maybe save some cooldowns for when it gets below 30%. I wouldn't blame you for bloodlusting that either, although having bloodlust for King Dazar is usually best for time, and sometimes you're just going to want it for Kula the Butcher for safety. So, it's hard to decide what to bloodlust in this area. Even on Tyrannical weeks, I wouldn't blame you for bloodlusting Shadow of Zul, though, as the Keystone level starts to get high. Other than that, this is going to be, against Tyrannical, primarily the affix to worry about here. If you don't have an Enraged Dispel, though, Shadow of Zul and Queen Patla here and the Berserkers in this area, all of them can be very deadly. So having an Enraged Dispel is going to make this dungeon a lot safer for you. If you don't have it, on basically every trash pull where there's a dangerous mob, so that includes enemies in this room as well, you're going to need to, start kiting at 30% and just get out of there. Shrine of the Storm, you're going to have to watch out for a lot of explosive spawning when you're pulling a lot of small enemies all at once. So getting those things killed in a couple globals so there's not too long for explosives to spawn can be really useful, particularly if you can kill enemies within a stun. I recently learned that explosives aren't going to spawn on stunned enemies, so if you can kill everything inside an AoE stun, that can be really, really big. So, you pull this stuff and then you keep them chain stunned until they're all dead. That can help you keep explosives down, or at least it can keep the explosives from spawning early in the pull, and then you can deal with them after the stuff has died, because you have a little bit of time before they go off. So that can be a useful little thing to take advantage of. Again, you have a choice in Shrine of the Storm with what to skip. I prefer skipping this area unless I'm kind of forced not to. So that's what I would recommend this week, but you may wish to instead skip... Oh, you can't really skip this pack. But you may wish to instead like skip these guys, not pull the mini bosses. Pulling these mini bosses is something that makes this route work easily without a rogue, but if you do have a rogue, it's pretty easy to skip both of these mini bosses with that, with access to Shroud to get past this guy. So that might be a way to change this route if you do have one of those. But the mini bosses aren't too bad. You're going to have to watch out for raging if you don't have an Enrage Dispel. Sorn's Carved Flesh is going to be pretty deadly with raging, and you're going to want to try and push Heldis so that she doesn't get a Gale Winds in her Enrage either. Siege of Boralus, raging can actually be a little bit to your advantage, as it can make spotters do double damage with their sighted artillery, and that can help you clear trash really quickly. It's not as fast as Bolstering Week, where you could bolster up a spotter, but it's a little bit less. It's a little bit less of a checkmate situation as well, where you end up getting spotters or commanders bolstered to the point where you can't actually kill them. So I'd say that Raging Siege is actually probably one of the better ways to do Siege of Boralus, and then you can take a spotter around and kill a bunch of trash with it. My route that I have shown here doesn't use that strategy, but if you were wanting to use that strategy, what you would do is skip, you'd skip this stuff by using this obelisk, you'd skip this pack, you'd skip, a bunch of stuff over here, you'd definitely skip this pack, and then you would go over here, get this spotter, and then back pull a bunch of these enemies and kill them with the spotter's circle. It can be tough to set that up, it can be lethal, but it's very fast if you can set that up. It's a great week for Temple of Sethraliss, except for Tyrannical on Galv. It's going to be tough, and Explosive actually on the last boss. So this is going to be a dungeon. You're going to run this dungeon, you're going to feel like everything is smooth sailing, and you're going to, Galv is going to be tough, but manageable. You're going to get through it. And you're going to get to this last boss, and you're having explosives spawn on all 4 of these different hexers, and you have one person in your group or whatever who's been doing explosives the whole dungeon. Everybody else hasn't really been worrying about it, and you just get overwhelmed and killed on this boss. So be ready for that. The way you're going to want to do that is probably assign parts of the room to certain people to kill explosives in. Normally, you'd want to have everybody focusing damage on the Heart Guardian that spawns and kill that off first. But what you're going to want to do instead is you probably want somebody like a Rogue or Demon Hunter who has mobility and can kill explosives quickly to handle half of the room and just stay on that half of the room while the other members of the group and the Heart Guardian are on the other half of the room and kind of handling all the explosives over there. That's the way that I found works best here. Really great spot if you have something like a Beast Mastery Hunter that can easily, target swap to faraway explosives and kill them quickly. Even something like a Balance Druid, just making sure that they make the switch to dumping Star Surges into far explosives. Those kind of changes can be really useful for doing this last boss fight with explosives active. Raging in the Motherlode is a threat, especially in the starting areas where addled thugs, mech jockeys, can kind of just one-shot you from nowhere, and raging peacekeepers can also murder your tank very quickly. So if you have an Enrage Dispel, you're going to want to activate that and stagger it one at a time and Enrage Dispel something and not ever have 2 things raging at once. You do have to make sure you actually kill stuff fairly quickly after you get them below 30%. Even if you soothe off the Enrage effect, they will re-enrage again after a little bit of time has passed, so you want to make sure you kill them before that happens. Either way, if you're in here without an Enrage Dispel, you're going to want to absolutely make sure that you don't have more than one raging thing that can one-shot you, or that, can come close to one-shotting you, because then, if 2 thugs are enraged at the same time, that's going to be a lot worse than 1. Other than that, Tyrannical pretty good in here this week. Nothing too awful with Explosive. Pretty good dungeon with that aside. So in the Underrot, this is probably the dungeon where the Awakened pattern is most relevant. Because this is the dungeon where you're almost always, if you can, you want to fight this obelisk with the end boss, and we're back to that being the Blood of the Corruptor now, which is a lot better than when it was the Fear guy. Although both of them could be fought with the last boss, and I would recommend doing both with the last boss. It's easier when it's the Blood of the Corruptor. So Blood of the Corruptor kind of naturally works out in this last boss fight anyways. You're already kind of moving around the room like you would with the Blood of the Corruptor active. So I recommend fighting this with the last boss. I would do that because if you want to go actually activate the Spire, you have to pull so slowly in this area because almost all of these enemies require interrupts. You can't really fight more than 2 at once. So if you're trying to actually get to this portal the old-fashioned way, that can be really, really painful. So instead, I'd fight this with the last boss, and it's tyrannical, but it's still doable in here. I'd say this is one of the easier end bosses to fight with an awakened enemy, especially when it's Blood of the Corruptor. Explosive, not too bad in here either. Not too bad with that boss. So yeah, this is my route for the Underrot. Let's move on to the next one. Tol Dagor, I've included a little bit of extra count just in case something goes wrong. This is one of the dungeons where I think it's most common that you accidentally miss some enemy somewhere. So I've included these 2 crocodiles here. You don't actually need to pull them, though. You see if they go out of this route. We're still at 100% at the end here. So I like pulling these because it doesn't really make this pull much harder. And, you know, that gives you a little bit of flexibility to accidentally not pull, like, you accidentally don't pick up this guy or whatever, and you're going to be fine that way, but you wouldn't be if you didn't pull those crocodiles. Up to you whether or not you want to do that. You know, you can make this route closer to 100% if you want to. Affixes active in here. Again, the operative one is going to be Tyrannical. Explosive in here is actually pretty annoying too, though. Enemies flee all over the place. They spawn explosives afar when they've fled. The boss fights can be kind of tricky with explosive too. There's a lot of enemies on a lot of these boss fights. You know, Sand Queen has a lot of adds. Those can spawn a lot of explosives all at once. So there are places here where explosive can get you. Raging can be bad too if you enrage a bunch of crabs and they can kill you pretty quickly. So saving AoE crowd control effects for when things get low is a good idea. And also when enemies flee, you have to be really careful in these areas because these enemies flee and then they'll like, you know, these things will be at 2% health, they'll flee, and then they'll start raging Salt Blast casting on your tank and just murder them from 30 yards away. So make sure you finish everything off, save crowd control for when they get low, use things like Binding Shot, Typhoon, Ursul's Vortex to keep them nice and close together and killed before they, you know, run away and spread out and then are spawning explosives and doing raging Torch Strikes and raging Salt Blasts from far away. Waycrest Manor, I'm still on the always pretend you have a top left door plan. So that strategy, which one that I've been doing on live servers pretty much every time I get this dungeon, is you just always take this spire over to the left, and then, especially on Tyrannical weeks, that's really good because you get a Bloodlust on this boss right away. It's really, really valuable. This is a dungeon where you can fight an awakened enemy with the last boss. With explosive, it can be a little sketchy, and usually the enemy you'd want to do would be the spider here from the Cursed Spire. That can be tricky. There's already a quick kick required on Gorak Tol, so if you don't have a good set of kick cooldowns in your group, it can be kind of sketchy. So I've not included it in my route this week, but it's something you very much can do, and probably should if you're trying to time high keys, like in the 20+ range. But otherwise, you can just use my strategy of actually going down here and activating this obelisk. That'll make the last boss fight a lot safer, especially with Tyrannical Explosives active. I wouldn't want to mess around with that if you aren't comfortable with it. Junkyard, I think my usual strategy of going to Gunker is not going to work if you are in North America this week, because I believe the hard mode enemy is going to be above Gunker. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's on a 3-week rotation, and I think it's going to be the 11, 8, 5, and 2 weeks where we're not going to be able to go Gunker first. But I could still be wrong about that, and that is North America specific. If you're in other regions, I think the hard mode enemy is over different enemies on your weeks, so I don't know, it's really weird. If Gunker is available as a first boss, I really like going towards it because you get these spark bots early. You can get this shock bot on your first pull very easily, and you can get these two very quick as well. You can even get this one if you're willing to pull this malfunctioning spark bot. A rogue can go get this and vanish, or a rogue can go down into the tunnels and get this one and vanish. So there's a tremendous amount of shock bots available in the first minute of the dungeon if you go to Gunker. But if the hard mode enemy is above Gunker, you can't do that. So instead, what I'm doing is I'm going up to the troll and then going on a nice leisurely adventure down this way, back up this way, and then to the end boss, which I'm not fighting with any awakened enemies this time, but you could fight with either the Blood of the Corruptor or the Spider. I'd say the Spider probably the easier one to do with the end boss of this place, especially this week. But, you can kind of pick your poison if you want to do an awakened enemy with the last boss. Either one will definitely speed up your run, but add some difficulty to it. The main raging threats in this dungeon, weaponized crawlers here, so Scrap Cannon and Shot Coil, both of these are going to be very lethal with raging active. Prowlers, also very dangerous with raging active. There are a couple that I have included in this route here. You could, especially if you don't want to activate the Spire, if you don't want to fight the Spider, like if you're willing to fight the Spider with the last boss, you could actually pull 0 of these Prowlers, and that probably is a good idea if you're going for a high key where this will start to be one-shotty with the Pounce and Raging going on at the same time. And then even enemies in this area, so no meeting slimes, that's going to do quite a bit of damage while they're raging. So make sure that you kill those off quickly. Make sure you're locking down these slime elementals. Don't let them get slime bolts or slime waves off, ideally. And if you can do all that, shouldn't be too bad this week. Workshop is going to be mostly about the boss fights this week, although there are some raging enemies that can give you some trouble here. So the enemies I'd like to specifically point out, this spawn here of defense bots is going to be something that will really start to truck once they are raging. You probably want to kill these off one at a time. You want to not ever really have more than one of these raging at once. If you have an enraged spell, that can be really helpful in this area too. But yeah, these enemies, very deadly. You probably can't use a Bloodlust on them, although you can, I'd say, on Fortified Weeks, actually lust this 3-pack, because you're probably going to want it for, you know, the boss fights in this area. Maybe you can still use it here, though. I'm not sure. And you have an option as well, whether you want to fight Blood of the Corruptor with the last boss or not. For time purposes, you probably should fight this with the last boss, but it will make it more difficult. So, you know, you have to make a decision there. All right, that's it for this week in Mythic Plus. Hope this video has helped out. If it did, remember to like and subscribe. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos, and let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed or any cool strategies that you have for beating dungeons this week. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.